What's up, football fans? Welcome to another episode of the Extra Point. Super excited to be here with you tonight. Not super stoked that my brand new camera is not working, but there's only one person in here right now, so we'll be all right. We'll get there. Um, really excited to go through an auction draft recap tonight. We had a couple of auction drafts last week, so if you were able to tune in and catch the first hour, my buddy Kendall was with me. We had a lot of fun, obviously commentating and kind of talking through the draft while also trying to draft. Not the easiest thing in the world to do. But we had a lot of fun, and especially after the first hour was up, it was cool to kind of settle in and actually start bidding on some players and getting some guys in. So really excited for a recap tonight, and looking forward to an opportunity to interact with anybody who was obviously there, and looking forward to some comments here in the chat tonight. So if you're excited about the show, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you follow on Instagram. You can catch me at _extrapoint_FFB. I'm also on Patreon and Spotify. So really excited if you are more of a podcaster, really an audio listener. Don't have time to turn into the live show every week. No worries. You can always follow along, or in this case, listen along with the audio content on Patreon and Spotify. Cool announcement coming. I have known about it for a couple weeks. I haven't said anything yet until it was officially official, and it is officially official now. I'm actually going to be joining Dynasty Pros as a staff writer. So if you are looking for some written content, you can check out my written content on Dynasty Pros. I'll be writing probably about an article a week. It will almost all feature Dynasty content. And I'm obviously going to try to take a different approach than what we're doing on the live shows and any of the small videos that we're making. So really excited to be adding, written content into the portfolio of work. And then lastly, I had a couple friends over the last couple of months really just kind of say, like, look, how can we support you? One, doing what you're doing, right? Being a part of the show, listening in, obviously leaving comments in the videos, being a part of the chat when we're doing the live streams. But how can you support? Help promote the Patreon content, help promote the Spotify content, because the audio content is just another arm and extension of the brand of the Extra Point. Post this in your leagues. I don't want to be that guy that's just constantly plugging his own product and throwing it into my league chats. So I've kind of stopped doing that for the leagues that I've in. I did it the first couple of weeks, and by now you're either listening or you're not, right? So I know a ton of folks are in leagues where I'm not a participant. If you like the content, if you feel like there's good value, just throw it in there and say, hey, I've been listening to this guy, Phil Ruskin, with the Extra Point. I think he's sharp. Or, hey, I think he's got some interesting or different takes than maybe what we would look at. So that would be a really great help as well. Couple more announcements, and then we'll definitely dive in. I'm going to read this so I don't screw it up. But we have a Scott Fishbowl golden ticket that we will be giving away. And that's through our affiliate channel of Get Right Fantasy Network. So shout out to those guys on Friday nights. Come mock draft with us. Always a good time. But we're going to be giving away a Scott Fishbowl golden ticket and doing a race for that particular spot at the end of the month. And so for a chance to win a spot to Scott Fishbowl 14, all you need to do is type in hashtag SFB14. Again, hashtag SFB14 in either the live chat or in the comments afterwards. And then obviously you need to be subscribed to our channel, as well as my partner channels, Get Right Fantasy Network, and then my buddy Kendall at the Fantasy Football Tavern. So as long as you're typing in hashtag SFB14 and subscribe to those channels, you will have a chance to enter in for the golden ticket. As a reminder, for those that don't know, and I'm guessing if you're watching this or listening to this, you probably do, but just in case, Scott Fishbowl is a charity tournament. So make sure to go to fantasycares.org to donate. And donating to Fantasy Cares helps raise money for various charities, with the bulk of the money going to Toys for Tots at Christmas time. Couple more quick announcements, and then we will dive right in. Next Thursday, July 4th. Happy July 4th to everybody. Copa America. I'm a big soccer fan. Copa America just started tonight, and that's why I've got my USA sweatshirt on. So I'll be supporting them this Sunday. But as it's next Thursday, and that's generally when my show is, obviously I'm not going to have a live show during the holiday, but I will be doing some podcast content. So again, check me out on Spotify or Patreon, and you can listen along there. Well, without further ado, let's get to what everybody came to see. So this was an auction draft that was held last Wednesday, and it was a 10 team, excuse me, $500 budget, 10 team single quarterback with two running backs, two wide receivers, one tight end, and three flex spots. It is a 25 total man roster with a 15 bench and three taxi. It is a 4 point passing touchdown scoring format. And the reason why I bring that up is I know there's some folks that will say, well, Phil, a touchdown is worth 6 points. Why isn't it worth 6 points? Honestly, it's fun to play in different types of leagues. I've played in tight end premium. I've played in, super flex. I've played in single quarterback. And so I think playing in a lot of different leagues, one, gets you exposure to different strategies, but two, just makes it a little bit different than what your normal standard leagues are. So this was a 4 point scoring format for passing touchdowns. And I think that impacts the quarterbacks the most for obvious reasons. It's what that's going to determine, their values. But the reason I say it impacts the quarterbacks the most is it does change, in my opinion, who you are targeting and who you are drafting. And what I mean by that is in a 4 point scoring format, I'm highly targeting the rushing quarterbacks more so than I'm valuing the pocket passers, because I know that they're going to have that rushing upside for the 6 point rushing touchdown versus that 4 point passing touchdown. Obviously, the rushing yardage is going to help. But the 6 point format, I'm now looking more at a broader range of my quarterback pool. I'm now looking at a pool I'm looking at total touchdowns. That's really what I'm after. So with total touchdowns, obviously Patrick Mahomes, not going to be a huge rusher. CJ Stroud, not going to be a big rushing quarterback. Jordan Love. But their total touchdowns are going to be much higher, than potentially an Anthony Richardson or maybe even a Kyler Murray. So I think a 4 point and a 6 point, it's really important when you get into drafts. I know you all do this, but some folks don't, right? I always see it in when we start a new draft. Well, what's the scoring? What's this question? What's that like set? Go read the settings, because it does impact who you're going to target, especially in an auction draft. And that's what we're going to focus heavily on tonight, where you do have access to all the players versus a snake format where you kind of get what you get because of the position that you draw randomly, in the snake format. So as we get into auction tonight, I always think it's kind of funny. Like, we all want to go through rankings, right? And who's the best player? And well, what about this guy versus that guy? And what do the rankings say? And we consult, some of the top experts in the industry. But with auction, I think it's a little silly when people put out like an article that says, well, this player's worth this much. The league's going to set the market. And you'll see that tonight as you can kind of take a look here on the board. You may go to some of the top websites and you'll go and see, well, they have an auction value and they say that I shouldn't be paying more than this much for this player. Well, that's maybe a good guideline, but ultimately your league is going to set the market price. And so what I really want to encourage everyone to do in an auction format is go do your rankings, right? And I talked about this a couple weeks ago on the show. I like to create a spreadsheet of my depth chart because I like to know where I'm at as the draft continuously progresses. Just like the real NFL, I know where my positional values are. I also know who my staples are for the team. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I know if I'm drafting Derrick Henry as my RB2, I probably need to start looking at who's going to replace him, either in the rookie draft or am I drafting a young player in this draft who I think is a developmental player. So the reason I say do the rankings, and I really encourage you to do your own rankings, no matter what the format is, but especially in an auction, because when you start to see the players come off the board, and again, the league sets the market price. Well, if I could get a player who's second or third in my rankings at a 10, 15, maybe $20 discount, now I know I can spend up at a different position, or I know I have some money left over in the draft when I want to build out some depth. So different than a snake draft where we would say, oh, well, this player dropped. He should have been a third round value, and I'm able to get him in the fourth. Because we don't have true, rounds in an auction draft, the rankings are even more important. One quick observation, and this is true in every single auction draft I've ever done, and I'm in a ton of leagues, and the vast majority of my leagues are auction. The first hour, guys are stoked. Guys have money. It's burning a hole in their pocket. I kind of equate it to like when you were a kid, and I didn't grow up with grandparents, but I had a really awesome aunt and uncle. But like your grandparents or your aunt and uncle, or someone gives you like like a Best Buy gift card. That used to be the thing back in the day, man. You got a Best Buy gift card, you knew you were stoked. You were ready to go and buy a video game, go buy a CD. That's how old I am. But everybody has money and they're like just ready to spend it and burn it. So there's a couple of different strategies in an auction format. right? In that first hour, we know money's going to come off the board. Everyone's got the same amount of money. In this draft, it was $500. So the prices, they're going to get bid up. And ultimately, the first strategy is go get your guys. If you believe in Justin Jefferson, you think he's the overall wide receiver one, go pay for him. That's the beauty of an auction draft. You don't have to have the 101, 102, 103 in a single quarterback format to get a player like that. On the same side of that, because the money's going to get spent, a ton of it in the first hour, there's a couple of rosters that spent 70 to 80% of their total budget on 3 players. So yeah, you have to know how to manage a budget. You have to be a little bit careful. Second strategy is some people will say, oh, well, I just want to save a ton of money for the end of the draft. I'm going to bid everyone up. I'm going to get everyone to spend all their money, and then I'm just going to have all this money left over. That's not a bad strategy by any means. But remember, once those guys are gone, they're gone. So you may end up having a ton of money left over for tier 3, tier 4 players that are ultimately going to produce wide receiver, 4 or 5 kind of numbers for your team. Or guys are just going to make you spend more money on players that you should be getting at a discount or should be getting very cheap because they know you have the money. So where I've found kind of my personal strategy is a little bit of a hybrid of both. Again, the rankings are really important. So I go into every draft knowing who I'm targeting from a rankings perspective. I want to go get my guys. And I'll probably spend up and potentially overpay. I might have to. That's how auction works. But I know I'm going to leave the draft with 1 or 2 ceiling performance players at the position that I'm targeting. And then where I find is the best value is the middle of the draft. Maybe that, first 30 minutes, everyone's just hot and bothered and there goes tons of money off the board. But as things start to calm down, as guys start to settle into the draft a little bit, I think that's where you can really start to extract some value is in the middle of the draft where you're not paying the premium prices that you would probably pay early on, but you're still getting premium players at a lesser value financially where you're able to reinvest some of that money back into the draft and into your roster later. And I'm going to highlight some of that for everybody tonight. So drafting for roster construction versus drafting for best value, that's kind of the last, I won't call it a strategy. I think it's just a different take. But in an auction draft and in a snake draft, it's really important to identify 2 things. Number 1, who's going to hold their value. So if I'm drafting a player that I know is, young on a contract, they're probably going to hold and retain their value. Who's going to increase in value, right? We don't want depreciating assets at the end of the day in a dynasty league, but in that same vein, you do have to buy some guys or draft some guys if it's a snake auction where ultimately they're going to have to produce this year because we're always playing in a 2 to 3 year window, but you still have to play for this season, right? We all know there's somebody in our league that has 7 first-round picks and they've just traded everything away. And that's fine. And that's fun. And like I've done that in a league where I was in a rebuild. I knew my team had no ceiling performance guys. And I highlighted that a couple weeks ago on a show. But I think if you're also looking at, do I have some players that maybe are, Devontae Adams is a great example. It's not sexy. He's an expiring asset. The dude's old. He's not somebody that you're going to, trade away and get a first-round pick back for. But he had 187 targets last season. He was the wide receiver 2 in targets earned on an offense that he's the only guy. So for 1 to 2 seasons, if I've got youth, and this is the key, if I've got youth at positions, let's say at wide receiver, I can add a Devontae Adams as my wide receiver 3 or flex and not feel bad about it. Jumping into the comments here. Victorious, what up, buddy? I always love seeing you here. I think the league being a 10-team league makes top-end talent more valuable. 100%. 100%. This is also a 3 wide receiver league. So you can see the trend obviously is in the NFL as wide receivers are going ahead of, most of the top running backs right now. But in a 3 wide receiver league, and you can see it on the board here, we've got a ton of guys spending the bulk of their cash on wide receiver positions. Sure, we've got some, Bijan and Gibbs are up there in terms of price at the RB1, RB2 price range, and they should be. But the majority of money was spent on the actual wide receivers in this league. So I want to jump in and talk about a couple of different builds in this league. Again, it's a 10-team league with a 3 wide receiver set. If it was a 12-team league, we probably would have had 2 wide receivers. But because it's a 10-team, everyone kind of gets an extra player. So this is my buddy Michael, and Michael's notorious for drafting for value. He's really good at it. He's one of those guys that I kind of equate to, if you've listened to anything in the Fantasy Football Tavern, my buddy Kendall, kind of like a day trader. Michael's going to have no picks next year. He won't. He's going to trade them all away. but he's also going to have a team that whatever he drafts is not going to look like what he puts on the field week 1. So you can see his team here. Lamar Jackson for $36, great value coming in at, quarterback 6, I think. Bijan Robinson at $94, Etienne at $77, Jahmyr Gibbs at $103, and Garrett Wilson at $96. So Michael spent the majority of his money on 5 or 6 guys. The rest of his roster this is a very much a stars and scrubs kind of approach. And the rest of his roster is not great. But what he was able to do, and he's done it already, is he was able to start trading away. He got Bijan and a first-round pick for Jonathan Taylor and a second, maybe a third. I have to go back and look. But my point is he was able to go and trade Bijan away to bring in JT plus a first. He was able to then use that first with something else that I can't remember off the top of my head to go and bring in T. Higgins. So he's changed over his roster almost immediately. And I don't think you have to do that right away. I know everybody's always sending trade offers the second that the draft is over, whether it's snake or auction. Personally, I like to let the draft settle a little bit. I like to see what guys' values are. If it's too good of an offer to pass up, then sure, like I'll take that offer. But I think the one thing that everybody wants to do is, I shouldn't have picked this guy. I got to go get that guy. And they start trading away. Like, we are in June, right? It's not training camp season. Yeah, there's some hype videos of guys running around, but ultimately there are certain players whose values are going to increase. Sell them in preseason if you're guaranteed, if you've convinced yourself that you need to sell them. But my point in highlighting Michael's roster right here is this is a really good way to just go and buy some of the most valuable assets that you can possibly grab in a league here. And then knowing that you're not going to end up keeping all of them, trade them away and start to rebuild the roster that way. So Sam Laporta and George Kittle here, probably not trading away Laporta. Laporta, obviously the tight end 1 last season as a rookie, but Laporta was also the tight end 1 price-wise in this league here at $48. George Kittle's an expiring asset. He's probably got 2 years left, and he's in a crowded offense in San Francisco. Obviously, he's had some injury history. If he had Laporta and another young piece, then perhaps that's a really good opportunity to trade Laporta to bring some guys back in, knowing that you have a younger piece at tight end that you feel comfortable with. For example, like right next to him here, Jake Ferguson, $15. So again, Sam Laporta, obviously way better than Jake Ferguson. But my point being is I do think the way that Michael went about this draft was really smart. Grab the most valuable pieces he can, because again, I just said at the top, the 2 things we're targeting, either an auction or a snake draft, but in Dynasty is we're going to target players who are going to hold their value or who are ultimately going to increase in value. So good job from him. If there's opportunities throughout the rest of the summer, to kind of talk through some of the ways that these rosters change over, I'll do that on trade shows so you guys can see like, hey, this was something you talked about in a startup draft, and then you featured this same team later. This player got traded, and these were the terms that were accepted. We'll definitely do that. Everybody knows the win now approach, and win now obviously meaning I'm all in, unlike the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones, who are very much all out. Win now is I've got older guys, I've got expiring assets, but look, they're going to be really good this season. I'm probably going to have a really good opportunity to win the championship. A win now team, generally, in my opinion, is going to look more like what a really good redraft team is going to look like, season-long value. I would say there's kind of two schools of thought on win now teams. Number one, if you're really all in, go all in. Trade some picks, really get the best opportunity to build up a good depth chart, but to also have some ceiling performances. The other idea is if your team is already, fairly deep with older guys, save those picks, because if you don't win, you don't want to mortgage the farm. Ultimately, you could set your team back 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And rebuilding is a lot of fun. I talked about that on a show a couple weeks ago, but you don't want to rebuild forever. At some point, the rebuild has to end and you have to be competitive. And hopefully the rebuild leads to the playoffs. And that's really what we're trying to do. So this is Mike's team. I have 2 Michaels in this league. So this is Mike. And this is very much a win now team. And you can see CJ Stroud with really good youth at the quarterback position. So fantastic there. But Christian McCaffrey, 2-year contract extension with the Niners, ceiling performance, obviously can be the overall RB1. Saquon Barkley, can certainly be the RB1 in a new offense in Philadelphia. But both of them, CMC coming off the board at $96 and Saquon Barkley coming off the board at $62. And then we start to look at the receivers. Obviously Mike spent up here for McCaffrey and Barkley, but he was able to get really good value here with Hollywood Brown for $12. That's a great price. Hollywood's on a 1-year contract. Rashee Rice's suspension hasn't come in yet. We don't know what that's going to look like. But to me, for $12 for a season-long rental, you can't really do any whole lot better than that. Steph Diggs for $25, Mike Evans for $20. So the majority of the money was spent here on the running back position, but you've got two guys that give you a chance to actually have overall 1 finishes. And your receivers are still going to be solid. I mean, Mike Evans has like 13, 10 or 12, I don't remember, like 13 years in a row or something. He's a 1,000-yard receiver. Somebody throw in the comments what it actually is. I should have looked that up before the show. But in a year last year where we expected Mike Evans to finally end that streak, he still did it with Baker Mayfield, and he's still the alpha in his own offense. Travis Kelce and Kyle Pitts. To me, Kelce is obviously an expiring asset. Kyle Pitts is, we hope we're finally going to see something from him this season that's going to represent what that draft capital was from the Falcons a couple seasons ago. DJ Moore, Alvin Kamara, Brock Purdy, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. I mean, like, this is a really, really good team on paper for what you're looking at for a season-long, win now team. It's obviously older, but, to have Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, DJ Moore, Mike Evans, and Steph Diggs as my core, I'm excited about that. I think the challenge for this, and I actually made a small trade with Mike yesterday. I just sent him a 3rd-round pick in exchange for Raheem Mostert because I needed a running back, and I know Mostert's an expiring asset, but I needed a player and a 3rd-round pick. I'm never going to miss that pick. But this is a roster here where Mike can win the league. Can win the league. There's ceiling performances here. He's got Kelce. So there's guys here that I think I really like. But again, just wanted to highlight, what a win now team looks like, because the downside of this, you have to sell some of these guys now to get the value out of them, because you're not getting anything out of Cooper Kupp or Devontae Adams next year. Alvin Kamara's value is decreasing. Steph Diggs is on a 1-year contract. Mike Evans is, re-signed. But like, if you're a fan of Dynasty and you are obviously interested in the content, you've paid attention to this space and some of these players, and that their values used to be fantastic, but obviously they're decreasing here as we go forward. So want to pause here real quick and get to the comments. Victorious looks like a 2-year win now window to me. If he keeps his draft picks, he might not have to full rebuild. Yeah, it's a great comment, actually. And I think one of the things that, is really important is, Mike's got a couple of guys that he could still sell mid-season, late season. And I always want to highlight that for people, because, everybody gets excited preseason. I want to go buy this guy. I want to go buy that guy. But as injuries start to happen, as your record, starts to take shape when the league's, in week 7, and all of a sudden your team on paper that looked like you should be 6-1 in week 7 is now 2-5. Maybe it is not the worst idea to sell some guys in the middle of the season as other players start to look towards the playoffs and bolster their roster. So yeah, I think it's a good win now roster. I certainly think it's a roster that's going to have a lot of success this season. But if it doesn't, there's still some assets he could sell, or like Mike had just said in the comments here, if he keeps his picks, he still has some players that, are going to be good for at least another 2 seasons, bring in another rookie or 2, and that could be a potentially championship team as well. Rafia Baum, I've never done a dynasty, but interested. How is it fun rebuilding when you basically know you're going to lose for a couple years and lose money? Okay, so awesome question, man. I think rebuilding obviously is the second most fun you can have besides winning the championship. But to answer your question directly, it's a question of how you like to play. I think there's some guys that, say, look, I'm going to go all in. I want to win the championship this year. I want to win the money. And then that's what we're all trying to do. But sometimes it just doesn't happen. So to me, if you're going to stay in a dynasty league, in a good dynasty league, you're probably making a 3 to 4 year commitment. You should be anyway, if you're going to, sign up for something like that. Ultimately, the downside of dynasty is you can't win every year, right? Redraft, you can win every year. If you have a good season, you have a good draft, a couple of things break your way. I'm in like one redraft league with my college buddies. I had made a couple trades the season before to acquire some picks for this last year. I ended up with the 101. I drafted Justin Jefferson. My 2nd round pick, I had Nick Chubb. my third round pick. Like, I mean, the list just went on and on of guys that like literally my whole team on paper was phenomenal. And then by week 4, I had nobody left. Everybody just got hurt. So in Dynasty, the I think it's fun, but I know there's some folks that wouldn't. There's just years when I look at my teams and I'm like, man, this roster is not ready to compete, or this roster just doesn't have ceiling performances to win. I'm going to trade. I'm going to rebuild. And obviously, a startup draft, everybody's available. But once that startup draft's over in Dynasty, you're getting 3 to 4 picks per season. Most Dynasty leagues are 3 rounds. Obviously, some are 4, but you're getting a couple of picks each year. And so, you really have to hit. And if you don't, like, that's just not, you're just kind of participating in the league, middle of the pack team. So to me, I really enjoy trading. I think everyone does. That's why we play Dynasty, because trading should be the best part. So I think it's a lot of fun to rebuild because you've got so much more action with trades. You've got so much more opportunity to try to find value, and to potentially sell 1 or 2 of those pieces. Like, for example, let's take a look again here at Mike's roster. Maybe this team, doesn't perform this season. He still has guys that are worth something. So this could be, tear it down, at the running back spot, potentially sell Saquon Barkley, who's going to bring a good price back in, and rebuild that way. So I think there's a lot that you can do, and a lot of different strategies, as we continue to talk more and more about Dynasty, that we'll highlight. And kind of, this is the whole point of the extra point, go a little bit deeper and kind of get into some of the actual minutia detail where it really can help you make the playoffs and obviously get into the championship windows. Juan Taco's team is really interesting here. I want to highlight his team tonight because this is a team that was really, really built for depth. And really what you can see up top, let's start at the quarterback position. $17 for Jaden Daniels is fantastic. I'm going to take his team off highlight for a second. If my memory is right, Patrick Mahomes set the market at $61, CJ Stroud at $60, and then Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts at $51 and $54 respectively. Juan Taco is paying about a third of that price for a quarterback that, yes, he's a rookie. He hasn't thrown a pass in the NFL, but we drafted him in the top 3 of our super flex drafts, and I got him at the 202 in a single quarterback league this season as well, in a rookie draft startup. So, in a rookie draft, not a startup. So you're talking about a player that has rushing upside in an offense that you kind of have to take what they were in the past, the Commanders, and throw it out the window. New ownership group, new head coach, new coaching staff. Cliff Kingsbury is the offensive coordinator, and like or hate or love, however you feel about Cliff, he's done good things with rushing quarterbacks. So to me, what I like about Juan's roster here is the depth that he was able to build because he saved so much at the quarterback position. And again, it's a single quarterback league. So you can see Pacheco and Kyron Williams coming off the board here. He spent $108 on both. So I love that because now he's able to turn, Brandon Ayuk, Rome Odunze, DK Metcalf, Jordan Addison, Brian Thomas, Xavier Legette with Zach Moss, Blake Corum, Najee Harris, and Jalen Wright. So he has a lot of options here. And while he lacks a little bit of that ceiling performance, he doesn't have an alpha of alphas, a Tyreek Hill, a CeeDee Lamb, a Jamar Chase. But his team has youth. His team has a couple of guys right now that are the number ones on their team. We expect Kyron Williams to remain the bell cow. I know Blake Corum is there, but we still expect Kyron to be the guy in LA. And look, Sean McVay loves Kyron Williams, and that offense is still probably going to be Kyron's backfield. It should be anyway. Sure, he's got a little bit of injury history. He's got his foot thing right now, but Kyron will be fine. Obviously nobody loves the Quentin Johnston pick, but for $4, what if we're wrong? Everyone thought, Quentin Johnston's a bust. He's not going to be any good. Jim Harbaugh comes in and says, we're going to run the ball and we're going to, guys, Justin Herbert's going to throw the ball. The offensive line for the Chargers is not that good, and the defense just lost a ton of pieces as well. So the Chargers want to run the ball. My question is very simply, can they? Right? Jim Coventry was on the main show a couple weeks ago for Scott Fishbowl's mock draft, and his exact comment was, the Chargers want to run the ball, but they don't have the ability to do it. So Justin Herbert has a ton of value, and he's a player that Jim was targeting. Now, that's a best ball format. But I think in Dynasty, people are sleeping on Justin Herbert. I just got Justin Herbert in a snake draft a week ago in the 9th round. Nobody wanted him. So to me, I don't love Quentin Johnston. I don't want him on my teams. I watch football. I watch a lot of football, and I saw him drop passes, and it just wasn't a good product last year. But what if we're wrong? What if he does have some value? For $4, it's fine, right? I think it's fine. The player I do want to highlight on this roster is Rome Odunze. And to me, this is one of the screaming values in the draft. And I try not to talk about my own rosters. That's not the point of this show, but I have to make this a comment simply because I paid up and I probably overpaid for Malik Neighbors at $99. Juan got Rome Odunze for a $33 difference in price. And we have Rome Odunze as the 103 at the wide receiver position and Neighbors at the 102 with Marv at the 101. And Marv, right here, Marv went for $128. So I think Juan did an awesome job getting Rome here for $56. There is a path for him to be better than Neighbors. I don't see a path for him to be better than Marv, but I do see a path where all three are extremely relevant and potentially wide receiver ones for their teams moving forward. Obviously, Rome Odunze is in a very, very crowded team this season. But what if Keenan Allen's not there next year? And even if he is, I think we expect Rome Odunze to have an okay season this year and take a second-year leap. He's certainly being drafted that way. So I love that value. DK Metcalf for $35 seems like an underpay. I know there's some folks that are down on DK Metcalf. They're down on Seattle's offense, but the offensive coordinator's new. The head coach is new. DK is still the alpha in that team. And if you look at their roster, Jordan Addison, sorry, I'm looking at his roster with Jordan Addison on it. Jackson Smith and Jigba, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. Those two are going to take targets from each other, not DK Metcalf. So I really like that value here at $35. Addison at $27. If you didn't catch the show, me and Kendall did yesterday. Be sure to jump on and check that out over at the Fantasy Football Tavern. You can also check it out on my site here at the Extra Point. But we went through best and worst values for rounds 4 through 6 by ADP. And you can check that video out. I talked a lot about Jordan Addison and how I'm down on him this season and potentially going forward because it's crowded and we haven't seen JJ McCarthy do it yet. So what I also like about Juan's roster here, Jalen Wright and Blake Corum for $6.16 respectively. Both are backups today. Both could end up being the ones in their offense. And I love the fact that he grabbed Blake Corum here, knowing that he has Kyron Williams. I'm going to talk in the 2-minute drill tonight about handcuffs. I'm not going to talk about them later because I'm going to talk about them right now really quickly. There are certain backfields, there are certain situations where handcuffs are super important. I don't know that handcuffs in redraft are as important, but I do think in Dynasty it's massively important. And so if anything happens to Kyron, the ability to just plug and play Blake Corum is fantastic. Obviously, it would be difficult to play them together. But I like this roster construction. I think he did a really good job. And ultimately, I think he did a nice job of spending his money, right? He left the draft with $6. He's got really good depth. He's got a lot of options to plug and play if there's injuries or if there's really good matchups that he likes throughout the season. So this was a roster I wanted to highlight because it has great depth. And I think this is one of the better strategies to take and one of the better approaches to take in an auction because he can trade, because you could package Jordan Addison in a second and trade up to increase the value of a wide receiver there. And so I think those are things that, as you start to get into the actual season, values they'll change. Obviously, they become a little bit different. But there's a lot of pieces here that hold value. And again, we talked about that. Who's going to hold value? Who should increase? Rome Odunze should become the wide receiver 1 on this team. Jordan Addison plus a second, Jordan Addison plus a first, that gets you a premium wide receiver. Get into the comments. John, tell me about flipping Pacheco and a first for Gibbs. Maybe. I think in certain leagues you could get that done. I think it's probably missing a little something. Maybe a third on top. I know people hate thirds, but there are some managers that say, like, look, I'll take the third and I'll add that into something else and I'll use it later. Maybe you're missing a small piece, a developmental piece there as well. But Pacheco and a first for Gibbs, it's still a little bit off, but it's not as far off as people maybe think it did. So Yeah. Oh, mentioning in the comments, I did it with Mike. Yeah, perfect. There you go. So can be done. It can certainly be done. And I'm higher on Pacheco than I think consensus. I want a part of the Chiefs offense. And if you're telling me that Isaiah Pacheco is the guy right now and they re-sign Clyde Edwards-Helaire, that just further solidifies my belief that Pacheco is going to get the goal line work. He's going to be a solid, pass catcher out of the backfield. The Chiefs wide receiver room is, Xavier Worthy's in there now, but it's basically the same as it was last season. There's really no additions that they brought in other than that, because you have addition by subtraction in the case of Rashee Rice. We just don't know what he is yet. So, yeah, I love that. Pacheco, somebody I'm certainly very high on, and I featured him a couple weeks ago for the last segment at the actual namesake of the production, the extra point. So if you've heard that, you know how high I am on him for this season, especially. This is Philly Bulldogs. This is another strategy, and again, I talked about it at the very beginning of the show. Everybody wants to save their money. They're, I don't want to run out of money, or what happens if I, get everyone to spend up? I'll have all this money left over at the end. Yeah, it's true, but you've got to go and get some ceiling performances. So what I love about Philly Bulldogs roster is he's a Philly fan. He got Jalen Hurts. Awesome. He's got Breece Hall. You have overall RB1 potential with that player. I love the core wide receivers here. Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Tank Dell. Jalen Waddle just got a 3-year contract. Michael Pittman just got a 3-year contract. Tank Dell is on a rookie contract in an offense that we want pieces of, and an offense that we like. They just paid Nico Collins. I personally don't think they're going to pay Steph Diggs unless the Texans are really, really close to feeling like they can run it back towards a Super Bowl next season. I think Tank's going to get paid. If he has another solid season, I think he'll obviously be on his rookie contract, but I think he has potential to earn a second contract in the NFL, potentially with the Texans. What I struggle with this team is Philly waited so long to buy guys. He bid up a ton of guys. And if my memory's right, I didn't end up with him, but I was in on Devonta Smith, and I was bidding him up, and I ended up getting outbid at the end for him. Philly had so much money. I don't understand why he didn't buy Devonta Smith to stack with Jalen Hurts. And so I think that there's, I think the challenge is, if you do have a ton of money in the middle of the draft, for those that don't know, most auction drafts take about 3 to 4 hours. It's an investment of time. It's a grind. It's if you're having a couple of beverages, that's why I build in pee breaks, because a couple beers in and you might need the restroom. But I do think that if you have that money in the middle of the draft, you got to spend it, because you can't take it with you, right? Like, you're going to get 3 rookie picks. You're not going to get auction money left over that's going to roll into fab, or that you can take next season. Like, you get what you get. So you can see he ended the draft with $19, which, again, not terrible. Like, you don't want to end the draft with any money. But the problem is he had so much money left over, and you can see the roster. He ended up paying up for Gus Edwards, who's probably only going to be a 1-year rental. He paid up $10 for Tyrone Tracy, who could actually be something in New York. But he has 8 quarterbacks on the roster. And I mentioned at the very top of the show, I gave the roster breakdown. It's a 15 bench. If you have 8 quarterbacks on the roster and it's a single quarterback league, Victorious, he did the math already. Do you think he drafted too many quarterbacks? I find quarterbacks are hard to trade away in a 1 quarterback league. I'm going to come to that in just 1 second. It's half of his bench. There's 7 guys on the bench that are quarterbacks. So Victorious, to your comment, man, I'm with you. And Victoriousson is in a league with me, actually. It's a league called the Pro Bowl, and that's the league I featured a couple weeks ago. I'm in a rebuild in that league. I have Joe Burrow and somebody else, I can't remember, somebody that I could use. I tried like heck to get Joe Burrow off my roster. I couldn't do it. And it's not that people don't want Joe Burrow. It's not that they don't value Joe Burrow. It's that nobody needs him. Everybody, it's a 10-team league, and in a 10-team league, in a single quarterback league, everybody has a stud quarterback. On paper, mathematically, everyone should have a QB1 on their roster. So you don't really need to have 3, 4, 5 guys deep at that position. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago as well. Roster construction, regardless of who ends up filling out that roster, in a 1 quarterback league, I only want 2 quarterbacks on my roster. I only want 2 tight ends on my roster, maybe 3 if I pay up for an alpha and my other 2 tight ends are kind of poo-poo, then that's fine. But I want to put all of my roster positions in the running back and the wide receiver spot in a 1 quarterback league. So Do I think Philly has a good starting group? Yeah. Do I think he's going to win some games? Absolutely. I mean, you can't tell me Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, and Tank Dell is a bad wide receiver core. It's a great wide receiver core in a 3-quarterback league. I just feel like you've got to spend your money. And if you're getting into auction drafts, there's not a right way to do it, but there are some wrong ways to do it. And I don't think holding on to your money is a bad strategy. I think holding on to your money for too long is a bad strategy. And I think at the end of the day, Philly's got some pieces here, but Victorious even made the comment, I find quarterbacks are hard to trade away. I think it's going to be hard to trade away 7 quarterbacks. And I think what's going to end up happening is he might trade one and get a piece back. I think he's end up dropping quarterbacks to go and find guys on the waiver wire or is going to ultimately replace his quarterbacks with rookie picks next season. So, I think Rafi Abum, hell, last year he wouldn't even needed one of those quarterbacks. True. 66 different quarterbacks started an NFL game last season. Philly, you got 8 of them. So you're not going to be playing the waiver wire. Obviously, there's not much on the waiver wire in a dynasty league, but our waiver wires are our bench. So you're not going to be looking far. But again, don't wait too long, even if you don't want to spend all your money super early in a draft. I want to highlight 2 other rosters here because they're not super similar, but I do want to show Raf Danis here and Maddie Wayland. I want to kind of start with Raf Danis here. I love The Rock. I think he's awesome. Dwayne Johnson, I follow his content on social media. He's got his Zoa energy drinks or whatever. He's got everything, right? He's got like 6,000 products these days. But he was doing a promo for one of his energy drinks, and he was calling it Big Dwayne Energy, right? And I try not to swear on my show. So Big D Energy. And that's what I want to highlight with these 2 teams is these are Big D Energy, man. Justin Jefferson, $137. Jamar Chase, $136. Marvin Harrison, $128. It's easily the best wide receiver core in the league. You can't argue that. Maddie Waylands is second best in the league, in my opinion. I'll show his team in a second. This 3 wide receiver core can win you weeks by themselves. Problem is there's just not much else on the roster. 80% of the budget was spent on these 3 players. It's a $500 limit. Ultimately, this is where the money was spent. So Raf did awesome in getting some late value with Zamir White for $11, James Conner for $6, and Jared Goff for $2. So he still has guys that are going to be useful. But as we look down this roster, Evan Ingram's old and expiring. George Pickens we like. George Pickens is up and coming, but DeAndre Hopkins, Curtis Samuel, Marvin Mims, Chase Claypool, Brandon Cooks, Rico Dowdle, Madison. There's just not much here. So I don't think Raf did anything wrong. I'm not talking trash on his team. The value in his team is clearly at the wide receiver position. There are some pieces. He's got Jerome Ford on this roster. There are some guys that he can still use and he can trade. What I think is going to end up happening is if he's not doing well for this season, I think this wide receiver core is going to get broken apart, and that's okay. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at this team, where the value is, what you're paying. He could get multiple first-round picks for any of these players. Obviously, Marvin Harrison hasn't caught a pass yet, but we're drafting him as though he's going to be. He was drafted to be great. He was drafted to be the number 1 wide receiver in Arizona. He came off the board in this league as price-wise as wide receiver 5. That's what he was priced out as. And obviously, everybody wants a piece of Marvin Harrison. So we know Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase's pedigree. We obviously know that Jefferson has already gotten the contract. Chase will get a contract. I hope this team wins this season. I really do. Well, I want to win this season, but I hope if I don't, that this team does. Simply because I want it to work. I think the hard part is James Conner's older. What if Chase Brown isn't very good? What if Nick Chubb does come back and ends up splitting work with Donta Foreman and Jerome Ford and more of a committee than we expect it to be? So I think it's awesome. It's sexy. It looks amazing on paper. I tell you, every time I play Raf Danis' team in this league, I'm going to look at it and go, please let this be the week when Jefferson, Chase, or Harrison, poo-poo the bed, because I could lose. It doesn't matter what's on the team. I could lose just to those 3 guys. But again, we spent up really early, that Big D energy. We're into it, and it needs to work. Otherwise, we're going to end up having to trade some guys away. Maddie Wayland, I like his roster a little bit better. I think he has some more pieces. I think he has some more depth. But again, you can see CeeDee Lamb at $142, AJ Brown at 108 and Chris Olave at 105. I did the math on this one. This was 71% of the budget that was spent on those three positions. But the ability to get Rachaad White and Josh Jacobs at a discount, that's what you have to do. If you're spending up somewhere, then you have to spend down elsewhere. And I love his ability to go get Dak Prescott at $22. Obviously, the stack was CeeDee Lamb, but more importantly, $22 is basically half the price of Anthony Richardson, and a couple of more dollars for for Hurts and for Josh Allen. Too many J's there. But he was the QB3 last year. So this is why I love, the values that you can get of a player who, sure, he's a little bit older, but look, Dak's got years left in him, whether he comes back to Dallas next year or whether he goes to another team. Dak's still going to be a good player. He's still going to be a QB1. He was the QB3 last year. He got him at a discounted price, a stack with CeeDee Lamb. And because he was able to pay down for Dak, Jacobs, and White, he can add Rashid Shaheed, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen are older, but they're still useful pieces for this season. And then you can see some of the roster at the bottom, not that great. But at the end of it all, we spent 71% of the budget on the wide receiver room. So Chris Olave, could you trade him for a running back? 100%. Do you want to? Probably not, but you still have Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen to fill in as that wide receiver 3 without breaking apart the CeeDee Lamb Dak stack and without losing AJ Brown. And that's how I would rank those guys, Lamb, Brown, Olave. I think we all would probably agree with that. So this is a good roster. I think it's a team, again, that I don't want to play against, and I think not a lot of people do. But I like what he was able to do in getting some value at the quarterback and running back positions, a little different than what Raf Danis was able to do. And I'm curious how they develop. Again, I'm not talking trash on these teams. I think they're good. It's just not the way that I would build, not the way that I would spend my money, but it doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm always okay being wrong on a player take, and I'm always okay being wrong on a strategy. So I had someone hit me in the middle of a draft right now. I had a guy hit me up. He found out I was a staff writer for Dynasty Pros, and he was like, hey, man, after our draft's over, I have a strategy that I haven't told anyone about. I'd love to run it by you and see if you want to write an article about it. I love learning new stuff. So I'm hitting that guy up for sure, and we'll have a chat. Victorious in the Kendall, I hope you're in here, man. I don't remember if Kendall was drinking, but $40 remaining. Kendall's the Fantasy Football Tavern. It's part of the brand, man. He also has values, and I know Kendall pretty well, so I can say this. He also has values that he's just not going to pay higher than. And I think everyone does, right? And so, yeah, $40 remaining, not ideal. I'm not going to talk about Kendall or Rasta's rosters tonight simply because they are part of the Get Right Fantasy Network, and I want to, focus my attention on other folks' teams. But yeah, to leave with $40 is not a good feeling when it's a $500 budget. To leave with any money is not a good feeling, but 40, yeah, it's a lot. So, typical Bears fan. Yeah, maybe. I want to talk a little bit here as we kind of get into the kind of B segment of the show here, but the rookie prices and values, and I'll highlight a couple of them here for you. Marvin Harrison Jr. coming off the board, you can see here at $128 as the wide receiver 5 in this league. But if we look at kind of the startup drafts, and we include rookies in startup drafts, which most startup drafts do, go back and separate in your mind what a rookie draft would be separate than what a startup draft where everyone's included would be. And what I mean by that is, let's rank the wide receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. I have it Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, and Xavier Worthy. And you can debate that all day. But my point is there's 6 wide receivers that went in the first round of rookie drafts this season. Neighbors was priced out at $99. Rome was at $56. And I think most of us would probably agree that you are now at a tier break, with those quote unquote big 3. So Marv going for basically double the price of Rome, to me, that's why I highlighted Rome earlier. It's incredible value. It's absolutely incredible value. Could Rome Odunze be better than Malik Neighbors? Absolutely. 100% he could. Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones. We just don't know if he's going to be the quarterback next year. We know Caleb Williams will be the quarterback next year. He was the 101. We expect him to be great. That's why people are drafting Caleb Williams. So to me, that's a really great value. Keon Coleman, I want to highlight here on Bergie's team. Bergie got Keon Coleman for $32. So to pay up for Amon-Ra, top of the market price, Amon-Ra was actually wide receiver 2 or 3 in price value here at 140. Tyreek Hill at 97. You've paid up, but you're able to get a Keon Coleman who is a rookie that should be easily outperform what we would consider his ADP. And though there is an ADP in this because it's an auction, but what we would consider ADP in a snake draft at $32, it's fantastic. And then to see, I know it's my team, but to see Ladd McConkey at $27, and I can't remember where Xavier Worthy is, but for Xavier Worthy to come off the board at $21, those are great, great values. And I think it's really important to note, like, you still want those rookies, but you have to be really smart about how you balance your budget and where you're spending your money. Do I think Marv's worth a wide receiver 5 pricing? Not yet. Do I think he's going to finish in there at some point? Yeah, I do. So the investment is there. It just has to pay off. I'd feel so much more excited if I had Rome Odunze for $56 than Neighbors for $99, which I do, or Marv for $128. But that's just my opinion. At the running back spots, RB5 in pricing, also on Bergie's roster, which I thought was really interesting. And I wanted to highlight this. Jonathan Brooks. I love Jonathan Brooks. I think he's fantastic. I'm drafting him just about everywhere that I can get him. I think he's going to only rise in value. I think he's ultimately going to be in the top probably 6 or 7. I think to put him in top 5 next year for drafts is a little bit high, but I do think he can be a top 7 drafted ADP wise running back next season if he shows really well this year. But he went for $64. And the reason I brought that up is because he went for more than Kyron, Achane, Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor. So again, guys drive prices up in auction drafts. You just don't always get to pay less because on the paper it says that Saquon Barkley is a higher ranked player than Jonathan Brooks. And the truth is that Jonathan Brooks could end up being the better player long-term to own than Saquon Barkley. And because of his age, if he does well, he should be. So I don't think it's an overpay by any means. I just think looking at this board from an RB5 pricing, the reason I bowed out on Jonathan Brooks was and again, I don't want to talk too much about my roster, but it is important because it's a rookie. Trey Benson, who we believe is the RB2 in this class and could end up being the RB1 behind Brooks, potentially over Brooks, was $34. So when I when I kind of broke down my own rankings and I said, I have Brooks in this class, I have Benson, and then I'm kind of out on the running backs after that. Sure, I took some, I would love flyers on Lloyd and Wright and those guys, but like a player that I really believe and I can clearly see the path for Jonathan Brooks to be the guy, and I can clearly see the path for Trey Benson to be the guy in an offense that we like, I pivoted. And I think there's probably other guys, they're obviously not on this show, but I think there's probably other guys that thought the same thing. Hey, I can get a cheaper running back who's going to be in the same tier. We talk about tier rankings a lot for almost half the price. I talked about him earlier, but Blake Corum, who, there's debate of who is the RB3 in this class. I think a lot of people expect it to be Corum, but Blake Corum for $16. So rookie prices to me are always really interesting because everyone gets hot and bothered for rookies. We all draft rookies. We want rookies. In the NFL, everybody wants to get younger. I want youth on my team too, but I also want to have a nice, healthy balance of youth with experience and proven players of guys that I can say, hey, look, I know this guy can do it. I've seen him do it. I believe this rookie can help me this year and should be a guy that I'm relying on next season. But for right now, I'd rather pay down on a rookie and pay up on somebody that I've seen before than kind of go, quote unquote, all in on rookies because rookies bust. It's just the truth of it. We all know that's the fact. Ultimately, we believe we're drafting correctly. We believe we're drafting players that are going to be great. We believe we're drafting players that are the right pick. And that's just not always the situation and not always what happens. So Rafia Baum had a quick question here. Is the leftover money carried over to next year's draft or does current fab year, or is it just lost? Yeah, it's just lost. I know there's salary cap leagues where money, is involved. I know there are some auction leagues. I've never been in one, and I don't think I would really want to be personally, but I've heard of leagues where they do an auction rookie draft. The reason I say I wouldn't want to be in one is I could very easily, let's say you get $100 for your rookie draft. I could easily see two managers, bidding $100 on Marvin Harrison Jr. Well, how do you determine who gets that guy? You know what I mean? So I think there's more nuance there, which is Obviously, why I think most rookie drafts are your traditional picks. Obviously not snake; they're in a linear format. But yeah, it's an interesting thought of like, what happens if I lose? If I leave the draft with money, you lose it. It sucks. And that's why everybody wants to try to spend their money. And I think one thing I'll highlight too, Raffia, for you, do an exercise where you go back. I'll highlight my roster for 1 second because I did this. This is a good example of it. I paid $27 for Ladd McConkey. I left the draft with $13. Now, I'm not a genius, but math's not that difficult, and they have calculators, and I got fingers. 27 and 13 should equal 40. I look over here at Philly Bulldogs roster. There's Michael Pittman for $40. I have Anthony Richardson. It would have been a great stack. I would have would much rather have Michael Pittman than Ladd McConkey. Sure, McConkey could be great, but on paper, Pittman's proven in an offense we like. He's the alpha in his offense. There's just a lot more that we like about Pittman right now today versus an unproven McConkey. So sure, could I have spent up and left the draft with $0? Yep, I could have. I didn't. And that's how it goes sometimes. But always fun exercise to kind of go back through these auction drafts and take a look at the board, because if you've never done an auction and you do it, you're going to love it. You're going to be hooked. You're going to want to do more. And I've always said this. I do think this is the best way to do an actual startup draft, because you have access to all the players versus a snake draft where you kind of get what you get, and you get a pool of players based off the draft position that you are in. One more comment here from Victorious. Deontay Johnson at $5 is probably the value of the draft, but I think JT is a close second. I think Victorious was part of the live stream. In fact, I know he was. Kendall and I said that. I think we said it on air, and if we didn't, we said it because we stayed on off. Like, we didn't present, but we were kind of doing our own chat afterwards, after the live stream was over. That's exactly what I told him. I was like, dude, DJ going for $5 is a steal. Like, I think he must have gone when we were talking, because there's no way that I wouldn't have at least bid $6 on Deontay Johnson. But yes, absolutely a steal for $5. And JT for $52, yeah, was a screaming value there as well. And Rasta actually drafted him, and then, as I mentioned earlier, he's flipped him. He spent a first-round pick coupled with JT, and now he has Bijan on his roster. And that's the value that you need to get a player like that. So love what Rasta did there post-draft, to upgrade his running back. Let's jump into the 2-minute drill. I want to highlight 3 players really quickly that y'all need to keep on your radars. The first player, if you don't know, I'm from Gainesville, Florida. Go Gators. Ricky Pearsall. Love Ricky Pearsall. Round 1 pick, 31 from the 49ers. Look, he ran a 4.41 at the combine. He's 6'1", 189. He can play in the slot. He could play outside. He's got fantastic hands. Brandon Ayuk, as we know, is having some trouble right now with getting a contract done. I don't expect him to get a contract done with the Niners anywhere close to the value that he thinks he's worth, which means I think he's probably going. And reason I bring this up is Brandon Ayuk has a 24% market share, which equated to 105 targets last year. Those targets have to go somewhere. I saw Ricky Pearsall go for $12 in this draft. I saw him go for $17 in a draft that I did the night after this one. He has a wide receiver 3 ceiling his rookie season if Brandon Ayuk gets traded. George Kittle and Deebo Samuel both have injury histories. We know that Christian McCaffrey is the feature in this offense. Kyle Shanahan's a great play caller, but targeting Pearsall as a cheap auction target or late in your drafts is really what I think you all should be doing. And I would say this not because Ricky Pearsall's new, not because he's a hidden player that you're just finding out about. I say that because the window's closing. I do think Brandon Ayuk's going to go. I don't see him getting re-signed. And right now, if you want Ricky Pearsall, the price to acquire him is a whole lot less than it's going to be in the next month or two, whenever this potential trade goes. And I will say this as a caveat to kind of wrap the 2-minute drill up. If he re-signs, it's going to be for a lot less money than he wants. And I don't know how happy he's going to be. And I still think it's a possibility that he ends up getting traded next year, even with the contract. So go grab Ricky Pearsall. And then 2 other players really quickly to keep on your radar. Brendan Rice is going for like $2. Jalen McMillan is going for $2. Ladd McConkey is probably the only name in town right now for the Chargers. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers are they're good. We love Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, but they're getting older. They may not be around much longer, and I think Jalen McMillan could be a really good player to have on your roster, dynasty bench moving forward. So go and grab him. Well, as we always do, we want to wind up here with the extra point. And obviously, the extra point, just kind of about finding that little bit of value. And I mentioned it earlier, and I'll talk about it right now. Handcuffs are really important in Dynasty. And the reason we all know that is simply because injuries happen, right? The running back position is one of the most injured positions in the NFL. So I want to talk about three backfields that if you buy the number one running back, I really, really want to encourage you to buy the number two running back. Let's start with probably the most obvious one, and that's Bijan and Tyler Algier. Look, Bijan went for $104 and $101 in the two leagues that I'm going to highlight. The other league is called the Annexation of Puerto Rico, and I'll highlight that one after July 4th. Tyler Algier went for $2 and $7 respectively, and I have Bijan everywhere. I'm not going to speak anything into existence, but if Tyler Algier has to be the number one running back, this is a guy that ran for 1,000 yards his rookie season, and then he still ran for 684 in his sophomore season with Bijan there. So to get him and put him on your roster, if you're the Bijan owner, I kind of think it's a must. I'll be honest. We love the upgrade of Kirk Cousins. We think the Falcons are going to take a step forward in a division that if they hadn't drafted Michael Penix and had taken Dallas Turner, they should have, and they still can win the division. But I think Tyler Algier is a must-have on your roster if you have Bijan Robinson. The next one is the Arizona Cardinals backfield, and I actually think you can inverse how you view them. Obviously, James Conner is the starter today. He's going to be relevant. He's going to have value. But I think you can actually go and get Trey Benson and then pay down for James Conner. And I'll highlight it with James Conner went for $6 and $7 in two respective leagues. Trey Benson went for $40 and $34. Go start the year with James Conner. James Conner's injury history suggests that he is going to miss time at some point. And even if he doesn't miss time and he just plays a full season, which he never has historically in his entire NFL career, Benson's still going to be relevant this season. You could potentially flex him if you need him. But ultimately, you're taking the backfield of an offense that we like with Marvin Harrison, with Trey McBride, with Kyler Murray, with young pieces that we think is going to continue to get better. There's a lot of optimism around the Cardinals. And the one thing we know is that Conner is an expiring asset and Benson is the future. We've seen the path for him. And the offense is really, Kyler's already been paid. Marv's going to be on a rookie deal. Benson's on a rookie deal. And McBride's on a rookie deal. So there's a real possibility that the Cardinals could spend on defense. But for fantasy, they could go and spend on another wide receiver. Maybe they go and grab a T. Higgins in free agency next season. And that's an offense you're going to want a part of. And if you can get a Trey Benson with James Conner, those are two players that I would package together, and I would absolutely want both on my roster, especially if I'm the James Conner owner, to get Benson. The last one is a little bit of a flyer, but I do think it's interesting. Saquon Barkley is obviously the bell cow. His quote-unquote backup is Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts is the player that we're most fearful of taking away rushing touchdowns from Saquon Barkley. But Kenny Gainwell's 30 years old, if my memory is right. Will Shipley just got drafted. He had some injury history at Clemson that, pushed his stock down. But I do think Will Shipley is probably the backup you want to own in Philadelphia, and very similar to what we're talking about with Atlanta and Arizona. With Kellen Moore coming in as the play caller, we want pieces of the Philadelphia offense. They had a terrible second half of the season, so I think they're out to prove that was a fluke, and they lost in the playoffs to the Bucs. I think they're going to be high-scoring offense again. I think they're going to rebound. Saquon Barkley is going to be the guy, but Will Shipley is a stash, and I do think it's going to be, again, you're never going to get the kind of production you'll get from Bijan, but you're going to get a portion of that. So if you're the Barkley owner, Saquon Barkley went for $62 and $68 in the two leagues I'll highlight tonight, and then again after the 4th of July. Will Shipley went for $1 and $3. So go throw Will Shipley on the back of your roster. Honestly, throw Kenny Gainwell and Will Shipley on your roster if you're the Bijan owner, if you're the Saquon Barkley owner, because I think those are really, really good handcuffs that you probably should own in high-scoring offenses that we like moving forward. So one last comment here. Rafi Baum, okay, beer thought for Dynasty startup auction draft. Pay up for an elite talent and sacrifice an open bench spot. Fill them down the road. That is a phenomenal question. Personally, I think it depends what your roster construction looks like. I think for me, in a 10-team league, I try to generally take a stars and scrubs approach. I'd rather have 6 to 7 guys that I know I can play weekly in my 3 wide receiver and 2 running back spots and not worry as much about my bench, because the truth is your bench probably isn't producing that many points for you anyway. So I do think you need to pay up for some of the alphas, or at least the next tier of guys down. But I also highlighted tonight Juan Taco's roster, who I thought had really good depth and really good balance. So if you don't have ceiling performances and you do have really good depth and balance, go and take one of those depth pieces, package it with a draft pick, and go and get a ceiling performance guy. So I don't think there's a way that you can go wrong for you. It's just a question of how you like to build. Do you want to take kind of a stars and scrubs approach, or do you want more depth and more balance? That's it for tonight. And first of all, appreciate everyone being here. Always love hanging out with you guys. Have a really great July 4th. Again, no live show next week because of the holiday, but I'll get some podcast content out. So like and subscribe to the page. Again, SFB hashtag SFB14 in the comments here so that you can be entered into the golden ticket for Scott Fishbowl. Follow me on my YouTube channel. Follow along, or listen along, I should say, on the Spotify and Patreon side of things. And thanks for hanging out, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Extra Point.